Good evening. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this AJA Zoom event. Welcome to our regulars. And if you're a new person this week, welcome to you. We always welcome those watching on Facebook, and there are also people who will be listening to the audio replay of this session, which is broadcast every Thursday at midday and Sundays at 4 p.m. on J-Air Jewish Community Radio, which is at FM 88 in Melbourne or at j-air.com.au. My name is Alan Friedman. I'm Vice President of the Australian Jewish Association. You will have already seen David Adler, who's President of the AJA, as well as our guests for tonight, Craig Kelly MP, Leader of the United Australia Party, and also Natalie Duma and Catherine Reynolds, candidates for Wentworth and Goldstein, respectively. This week, obviously, we're taking a look at the United Australia Party, their policies and the role they might play in the formation of the next government. We're going to have an interview style for about 30 minutes and then take questions. For those who are not familiar with the system, we ask you that you raise your hand electronically in order to ask a question, and the way to do that is to click on the reaction icon at the bottom of the screen, and that tells us that you want to ask a question. You can put written questions into the chat function, and Robert Gregory, our Director of Public Affairs, will read some of them out during question time. Okay, so having a mainstream media very biased towards the left as we do means that voters simply won't get to see and hear in any depth what politicians from the conservative minor parties have to offer in the upcoming election. A couple of weeks ago, we heard from the Liberal Democrats, and so tonight we're going to put the United Australia Party under the spotlight and find out about the policies that are behind all those yellow newspaper ads that we've been seeing for some months. We're delighted that joining us tonight is Craig Kelly MP, who will no doubt be familiar to this audience as a prominent former member of the coalition government, but who resigned just over a year ago to become an independent member before announcing he was joining the UAP in August last year. We're also delighted to have candidates standing in two electorates with a Jewish presence. That's Natalie Duma for Wentworth, which always attracts a lot of attention, and Catherine Reynolds in Goldstein, an electorate that most people would not have known much about until Zoe Daniel entered the fray, and no doubt we'll talk about that. So Craig, Natalie and Catherine, thank you all for your time. We're very pleased to have you with us. I'm now going to hand over to David to start the questions. David, you might be muted.
Craig, I'd like to ask you to make some sort of comment about why are you doing this? Starting a new political party is a big deal. It's a big burden. Some people say that there's close to zero prospect of success. So what the hell are you doing?
Good question, David. I sometimes ask myself that in the morning. Look, about 2 years ago, I started to, probably longer than that, but really 2 years ago, I started to really worry about the direction that the Liberal Party was headed in. I signed up and joined the Liberal Party and was proud to be a member of it because I thought that, which we said in a statement on our front page, the Liberal Party, what we believe in. And the first thing was we believe in the inalienable rights of all citizens to get government out of your life. And that was what I thought, that was what I believed, that's what I fought for as Liberal Party for so many years. But when we had a Liberal Party in New South Wales here, copying what we saw in the Labor parties in Victoria and Queensland and locking people down, taking away their basic fundamental human rights of movement, I just thought that was an absolute disgrace. Then I saw the violation of the sanctity of the doctor-patient relationship. Again, that should be absolutely core Liberal Party policy, that you should be able to sit down with your doctor and there is a sanctity in that relationship, that you trust your doctor, you trust the skill and your expertise, and you let doctors be doctors. But we had the Liberal Party stand by while medical bureaucrats, many of them who weren't even doctors, were telling doctors what they could say, what they couldn't say, and telling them, I think for the first time in this nation's history, off-label drugs that they could no longer prescribe for off-label purposes. Generic drugs, cheap generic drugs, a doctor would prescribe them for an off-label purpose. We had the government interfering in that, telling doctors what to do. And I spoke out against these things. And I was attacked by my colleagues and by the senior leaders of the party that they basically told me, you have to shut up. Well, my conscience wouldn't let me shut up. And I felt the only way to do it, I had an option of just shut up, sit back, you'll be looked after, don't worry about, we'll look after you. Just toe the party line, do what the factional bosses want you to do. My conscience still wouldn't let me do that. So I decided to resign from the Liberal Party. Now, we get paid well as members of Parliament. I took it's about a $35,000 cut in salary for that. Plus, I gave up any prospect of some cushy job that the Liberal Party would give me down the track. And I was going to sit as an independent. And then when I saw the Liberal government actually standing by and saying, "Oh, we're against the mandates, but actually mandating Australians to get medical treatment," I just couldn't face that. The suppression of freedom of speech. I was speaking in the Australian Federal Parliament, and I was having my speeches censored by YouTube. So just think of that. A foreign corporation are censoring what's happening in the Australian Parliament so the Australian people can't hear that. And the Liberal Party thought that was okay and wouldn't stand up for it. So I thought I had no option then to help and work with other like-minded people that wanted to put their hand up. We came together under the United Australia Party banner. We've now got 151 candidates across every lower house seat. And we are taking to this election a very alternate platform from the Labor and Liberal parties based around protecting those basic freedoms that I thought my constitution gave me, but I've sadly found out in the last 2 years are not there.
Craig, I've spoken to a couple of pollsters who tell me that despite the enormous public exposure that UAP has gained through its advertising, they regard the prospects of success as very close to zero, including your own. Have you got any data, any information? Do you think this...
Are these the same pollsters that at the last election are paid out on the Labor Party the morning of the election because they thought the Labor Party was such a certainty to win? They actually paid out the bets they paid the bets out only to find out they had it absolutely hopelessly wrong. One thing that we found, there's been some published polling by several groups in Australia. When we're identified as the United Australia Party in a seat-by-seat basis, and where people can actually do it anonymously, our polling is multiple times what these official pollings have done. I saw one of our internal opinion polls earlier today, and I know it's internal party documents, but it is showing that we are on track in the state of Queensland to win at least one Senate seat. We've seen polling that was published late last year in the combined seat of Banks. I think it was Banks, Lindsay, which is Banks is down the Herschel Peakhurst area. Lindsay is based on Penrith and Macquarie. With 8.5% undecided, we were polling 17.5%. With the other groups, Liberal Democrats, One Nation at 5%, who would hope with preferences, which would take us into the 20s, 20+%, with still 8.5% undecided. Now, you can win seats in the lower house, has been seen from history, with 20% of the vote. Andrew Wilkie did that down in Denison in 2010. With a 20% primary vote, he won that seat where it's a 3 and 4 party contest. So it's not as though we need these massive 50% plus to get there. We can win lower house seats with 20% plus of the vote, and we can pick up seats in the Senate that give us a real chance of having the balance of power and stopping what would be the excess policies of the Labor Party to keep them in check should Mr Albanese actually, win. Or if the Liberals get in, we'd be there to put some spine into their, give them some real spine and steel into their backbone to make sure they're not just drifting off to the left.
Craig, I want to ask you a couple of things of specific interest to the Jewish community. First, the tough one, which I have to raise. Now, I know that although you've been personally accused, you are not at all anti-Semitic. But but there have been people that have been drawn to some of the UAP events or events that you have spoken at, where you have shared a stage or sequentially shared a stage with people that we would regard as unacceptable.
Yes.
There was an event recently in Canberra where Mark McMurtry spoke before you on the stage. He's one of the Aboriginal activists, founder of Original Sovereign Tribal Foundation, and made these all sorts of outrageous anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. It's not a good look. What can you say about
Well, firstly, I'm glad you gave me the opportunity to clarify this, because there was a story that was published in the Australian the other week accusing me of telling lies about this, which was just a disgrace. I've written a complaint to those journalists. Those journalists failed to contact me to find out exactly what happened. Now, on that morning, that was the day of Budget Day. Our United Australia Party event, we did a visualisation of $1 trillion worth of debt. So what we did, we had $1 billion notes printed up. I thought I might have one here in my office, but we had these $1 billion notes, fake $1 billion notes printed up with Ned Kelly on them. And we had 1,000 of them on the lawns of Parliament House to visualise that $1 billion worth of debt. We started at 5 o'clock in the morning. Now, another group on that day also were having one of these freedom rallies, right? We don't run it. We don't control it. We don't organise the speakers on it. Now, I understood they were going to set up down the bottom of Parliament House, down the second-year-old Parliament House in the grass area. They rocked up about 10 o'clock and said, we want to set up here. So that basically meant we had to pack up our display. Look, I could have had a bit of a Barney or a Blue with them, but I thought, look, we've done our event. We finished it. We've got the photographs. It was a big job to pack it up. We had like 50 to 100 people, United Australia Party people down there that had come from all over the country to help put that together. So we decided, look, let's pack it up. We packed it up. I went back into Parliament House for a while to show a few people around. I'd been invited to speak at that event, as you are at speaking at many events now. The only other speakers that I understood were speaking on that day were Senator Malcolm Roberts, George Christensen, and Senator Gerard Rennick, and myself. They were the only speakers. They were the only speakers that I understood there. So I've come out anyhow. Somehow or other, this indigenous group were there, and they were going on and on and on and on. And I got to the stage, look, I can't. Parliament's sitting. I can't sit here and listen to these people carry on. I've got to get back up to Parliament House. So anyhow, they wrapped up. They spoke for about 45 minutes, and I sort of lost interest and wasn't listening to what they were hearing. I was at the back of the stage talking to them. So I just went up on the stage and spoke. Now, I later found out that this McMurtry character had made some absolutely silly statements. They were anti-Semitic. They were talking about what the Union Jack represents some anti-Semitic, just total utter nonsense. Now, I didn't hear what he said on the day. If I did hear what I said, I would have commented on it being a speaker afterwards. These rallies, you don't control who says what. I didn't know. McMurtry was not invited to our event. Absolutely not, right? I didn't know he was a speaker for this other event, which was not controlled or all run by the UAP. I didn't hear what he said. Now, if you're gonna have these standards, you would never speak at any public event whatsoever. I've universally condemned what he said. Look, and anyone that knows me, to say that I'm anti-Semitic is just really it's an absurdity.
As I said, I've had the chance to meet with you and talk with you on these issues previously, Craig, and I would assure people that I have detected zero anti-Semitism. In fact, quite the reverse. I recall when you were independent, and I asked you, as an independent, what did you feel about the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and the movement of the embassy that Trump did? How would you? We should have followed what Donald Trump did. You've heard a US president after US president talk about this, but it was only President Trump that actually went ahead and acted it. That gave Australia the opportunity to follow President Trump's lead
and we should have done so. We didn't. It was cowardice, and that cowardice was from a Liberal government.
I'd like to now bring in Natalie Duma. Natalie, why don't you say something to introduce yourself? You're not as well known. So who is Natalie Duma?
Who is Natalie Duma? I am a dentist. I've been a dentist for 27 years. My background is we migrated from the former USSR. So my hometown was Odessa, where I was born. So I guess the place where there's a lot of upheaval at the moment. We came to this country for better opportunities. We had a lot of relatives here as well who came through in the early 1900s. So we had family here. And I believe Australia has provided myself, my family, with the most incredible opportunities to have an amazing life. I was educated at Sydney Girls High School. I went to Rose Bay Primary School. And then once I finished my degree, been working as a dentist for 27 years. So didn't even think about getting into politics up until about 6 months ago.
Right. Now, you left out a key aspect of your background. That, of course, is you're part of our tribe.
Yes, we came here because we were Jewish, because my family was discriminated against back in the lovely USSR, as were most people. My mother's surname is Feldman, so getting into a conservatorium of music was not something you could do because you were Jewish. My uncle was part of the space program, again, with a name like Feldman. It took him 3 goes to receive his PhD. So my mum decided that she really hated her country and pulled us all out of there. And we went through Italy as refugees and came to Australia.
Natalie, I've got to ask you the same question. Why are you doing this? Because I would have thought that looking at you standing in Wentworth, and let me say, although HAA doesn't endorse any candidates or parties, Natalie is an outstanding person. She's intelligent, articulate, she's got values, an ordinary person, the sort that we would like to see in Parliament. But you'd have to say your chances of success are, how would you rate them?
Look, never say never, because stranger things have happened. I'm a very positive person. And I guess you're asking me why I'm doing this. There is a very, very good reason I'm doing this. I, very similarly to Craig, was watching what was going on with the democratic society that we live in. And coming from a socialist country, you get an inkling of what's going on in your country. And I became quite upset about it. I was looking at my 16-year-old daughter and I was thinking, well, what legacy am I going to leave this particular young teenager? And I didn't like this legacy. So I was actually approached by Craig Kelly's campaign manager and he asked me to do this. So I thought about it and I thought, well, can I make a difference? And you know what? I believe I can. I come from a background that is aware of what's going on at the moment here. We're heading into government that really, it's government overreach. We don't have transparency with our government, which is very similar to what socialism was. And I think we really need to sit up and look at what's going on in this country and try and avoid it or prevent it or overturn it, because we can very easily lose our freedoms, but gaining them back is incredibly difficult.
I can understand why, as an ex-USSR family, you'd value freedom. Let me turn now to Christine Reynolds, who's standing in the seat of Goldstein. Oh, sorry, Catherine. Catherine, say something about yourself too.
Well, I have a very different background to Natalie's. I'm actually 4th generation Irish-English origin. I started my nursing career back when I was a teenager, and then after many years of working as a nurse, I then swapped across to study chiropractic. So it was a 5-year program that I studied, double degree, and I've worked as a chiropractor now for just over 10 years. The main reason with what I was looking at was exactly, having been a Liberal voter for all my life, was watching what was occurring and having a grandfather, both he and his brother were World War I veterans. I realised that our freedoms, if I didn't take a stand, then I really didn't know where we were going to be leading or be led by Liberal Labor parties. And so but I'd been slowly watching this probably since about February of 2020. And then as I gained more information, of course, I was seeing what Craig was doing. And that was really, Craig, I have to admit, that was really when you woke me into, I need to have a look and really follow what you're doing. And I was absolutely thrilled. And so from there, I watched with so much interest. I had been watching a lot of what had been going on in America. I come from a medical family, and one thing my father taught me years ago as a teenager was, whenever you're looking at something that might be happening in Australia, do look first at what's occurring in the US, because they're a good 6 to 12 months ahead of us. And that's something that stayed with me, and all through my nursing, but in particular when I was studying chiropractic, I was then looking what was going on there as well.
Now, any of you can answer this, but why is it that UAP people get accused of being fascists? I mean,
I'd love to answer that.
it seems like what you're articulating is the exact opposite of
I'd
fascism.
like to answer that, David, because I've been accused of that, and it's quite interesting because I'm Jewish, so my reply is completely ignored. I think that there is a slight misunderstanding in the population, in the general population, of what fascism really is. So to call a Freedom Party fascism is ignorant to me. To call someone who's of Jewish, I'm Jewish, and I've been called a fascist when I've been out campaigning, and it doesn't matter where it is in Wentworth, I've been called a fascist at least once every time that I'm out there, is again quite ignorant. Whether it is some sort of a mainstream media rhetoric that people are parroting, or where, I actually don't know where it's actually coming from, whether the Liberal and Labor Party are putting things out there because they're scared of us, maybe scared of Craig, I don't know. But it's quite scary to think that they attack you like that.
Okay. Craig, when Clive Palmer addressed the National Press Club, he rolled out what at first blush seemed like quite radical economic policies. How has that been received as you've been travelling around?
Look, as we explain this to people, people say, this is just common sense. Now let's go through some of what they are. We in this country hold a very unique position to dominate the iron ore export market globally. Many other countries, we have to compete with coal and gold and gas. These are very competitive markets that we're into, where there are many alternate sources of supply, and many countries have their own supply of these materials. Iron ore is a completely different situation. Asian manufacturing relies entirely upon iron ore exported out of Australia. Now, if we should be taking it as Australians, as shareholders of this great land, we want the management of the country to be as ruthless as they can when it comes to export sales and getting as many export dollars in the door. Now, Mr. Palmer's actually, he's been involved in the iron ore export business himself. He's looked at this market closely for many years. He understands it. And it was his recommendation that we discussed this as a party, that we were able to get away with putting a 15% export license fee on exports of iron ore from Australia. So what that would mean the buyer in China, mainly China, also Japan and Korea, would have to hold an export license. So they would have to buy it. So that means they would actually have to pay 15% more for Australian iron ore, which would go to the Australian people, to the government. Now, we could quarantine that money, take about 15 to 20 years of that iron ore export license fee, where there's no real great alternatives, other supplies. Right? That would actually be used to quarantine to pay off the $1 trillion worth of debt that the Liberal and Labor governments have run up. And not only does it quarantine the debt, it allows you to also take those interest expenses off your annual expense sheet, move them over into the other section of where it's absolutely covered and quarantined by that revenue coming in. Firstly, that guarantees your AAA credit rating as a nation, which means interest rates are lower throughout the economy. Secondly, if you take that out of the budget, having to pay that interest expense, you open up enormous opportunities to use that money elsewhere. Now, that's why by doing that, we can afford to actually put billions of dollars more into health, into this country, into healthcare. We can increase the pensions. We can reset the, what I would say, the decentralisation of this country by having zonal taxation, where if you live in a regional area outside of the major capital cities, that you get a 20% discount on either your personal income tax or your company income tax. Yeah, I was down in Wagga earlier today. People from Wagga are paying the same tax rates as people in Sydney, but they've got to come to Sydney for so many health services and other government services. So we see the country, we don't want to see people crammed into high-rise apartments in Sydney and Melbourne, like a lot of the property developers that run the Liberal and Labor Party see as a money-making exercise for them. We've got this vast continent that we should be decentralising, and that then goes into the issue of housing affordability. There was an article, I think, in The Age earlier this morning that talked about we have a generation of kids that have given up on the dream of home ownership.
True.
That is a disgrace. That is, there's not the benefits of home ownership are not just their societal benefits. So Robert Menzies put it so well in his Forgotten People speech. He talked about the health of the home as shows the health of the nation. And if people don't have the opportunity to own and buy their own home and save for their own home, well, they often give up. They just give up hope. So we want to restore that hope. So the idea of this regional taxation plan is to strengthen all our regional areas. So there's a young person growing up, a young family in Sydney or Melbourne or any of the capital cities can say, you know what, let's go and move to one of these regional areas because the jobs are there and where they can buy a home for $500 or a nice family home for $500,000 or $600,000 or $700,000 or $800,000 that you couldn't buy anywhere in Sydney or Melbourne today.
Right.
That lowers their cost of living. So those economic policies, really, when you think through them, they are just common sense, and we are the only ones proposing them. You don't hear Mr. Albanese or Mr. Morrison talk about the debt that's been run up. They've got no idea or no plans to repay it. They talk about all these great schemes they've got to spend more money without saying where the money's coming from. We're doing the exact opposite. Every scheme that we put forward, we're saying where that money is coming from.
Okay. One more issue I want to raise with Catherine. You're at the pointy end of facing these, the Climate 200 group. Arguably, the worst of the worst is in the seat of Goldstein, Zoe Daniel, former ABC journalist, a track record of anti-Israel statements, a couple of statements that come very close to being anti-Semitic in her track record. What's your assessment of the Climate 200 organisation?
Well, I must admit, I've seen Zoe around a little with her helpers. They're very much women-oriented. There are some men, but they're mainly women-oriented. But from that Climate 200 perspective, I really don't think they've got very much going. I mean, we know that they've only got they talk about climate change, they talk about prosperity. I was very fortunate not being, or I wasn't fortunate in one way, wasn't invited to an event at Greenpoint Reserve down in Brighton some weeks ago, and one of the UAP members for here was my set of ears as such. And in the process, he asked her quite a number of questions. So from that, I've sort of only gleaned that they really don't have a lot, that they talk about it, but then they don't go into when they're questioned, and there are significant questions that this gentleman asked, did not have appropriate answers for it as well. So there's that weakness there. But what will be very, very interesting is there is a forum for climate crisis to be discussed at the Brighton Town Hall Thursday of next week. Okay. And I've actually spoken to one of the community here who will attend, in fact, a couple I know that will attend to ask specific questions for them. So yes, her face is known and I understand that, but that's all I can really give you on that.
Now, Natalie, you've made comments about some of the moral issues behind the Climate 200 policies. Do you want to just touch briefly on that?
Yes, I actually do. We all want a good climate, and we all want quality of air and all the rest of the things that come with it, but we need to look at the humanitarian costs of what Climate 200 are proposing. They are proposing solar panels, they are proposing windmills. But first of all, there's no energy security behind that. And second of all, well, actually, it should be first of all, you have 7 out of the 10 major solar panel companies are from China. 45% of the wafers used in solar panels are created by the weaker people, and that's slave labor. So I have a great problem with that. The other thing that we are looking at is things called batteries, and I think they should be called blood batteries, just like the Blood Diamond movie. You have cobalt, that is a very important rare earth metal that goes into the production of these batteries in electric cars and the batteries that are with the solar panels. This cobalt is mined by children in the Congo. Some of the children are as young as 6 years old. They have no masks, they have no protective gear. It is slave labor. And as a parent, I take great offense to slave labor. I mean, we as a Jewish community have had to we had slave labor back in Auschwitz, and it led to the death of so many Jews. I really don't appreciate anything like that. So that I'm not a fan of what they're proposing.
Yeah. Okay, Alan, we're at about half time, so, and I can see there's a stack of questions already built up. Why don't we open it up for questions?
Okay. Just before we do, I'll just mention that if you're listening on J-Air, this is the Australian Jewish Association Zoom event, which we have every Wednesday night. Our guests tonight are Craig Kelly, leader of the United Australia Party, with Natalie Duma, candidate for Wentworth, and Catherine Reynolds, the candidate for Goldstein. David, I'll just very briefly hand back to you to tell everybody what's happening next week, and then we'll get on with some questions.
Okay. Well, here's our 1 minute advertisement for AJA. If there's anyone here who has not yet applied for membership, please go to the website jewishassociation.org.au after our event. You can subscribe to the email, you can make a donation, you can take out membership, like and follow the AJA Facebook page for the daily updates of news and views. Next week, of course, is Yom HaShoah, when we commemorate the Holocaust. And the way we will be doing that is with a very special event featuring Eddie Boas, who's an author, a Holocaust survivor, who has an incredible story of having survived with his family, and it is possibly the only family to have survived intact. We are also working with him for an educational video, which will be launched later this year. So that's quite special to have him come and talk to us next week about his personal story.
Thanks, David. We'll go to questions in a moment. I've just got a couple that I'd like to throw in before we open it up. Perhaps, Craig, I'll address this to you. I happened to switch on TV last night, and the Paul Murray show had a panel with the four minor conservative parties. There were four of the guys there, and it was very impressive that up in Queensland there's so much interest in the conservative side of politics. I'm just wondering what that's saying to you, the fact that so many people are branching out into forming these minor parties.
Well, firstly, it's a clear indication that the grassroots of the Liberal Party have been taken over by the so-called moderates or the left faction that are all tied to these lobbyists, these political lobbyists. The Liberal Party no longer represents the grassroots that were the party that supported them from election after election campaign. They no longer stand for the values that they said they do about freedom of speech, about the inalienable rights of Australians. They've drifted so far off to the left on so many policy areas that people are looking for alternatives, and they say we want a parties in there or candidates in there that will speak with a true conservative voice. and stand up for what I always thought were just common sense values, instead of this extreme leftist green agenda that we see that has taken over the Labor Party and is also now sadly taking over the Liberal Party.
Yeah, and I just want to ask Catherine a question. We've all seen what's been going on in Goldstein, and we know that the Climate 200 group has thrown a lot of money at Zoe Daniel. Does that make a difference? How much of a difference does the funding make, and how do you fight that sort of battle when you're not in the same league?
Well, Alan, what I've actually found from the very beginning was I started going to businesses at the very, very beginning. And that was where I started to really, really understand that they were grateful that there was the United Australia Party with what we had to offer. It was slow to begin with. It's interesting how the way Zoe has worked through things with her little team. I worked in a lot of a very different area to where she has ever been. And so with the money that she had with the campaign launch, which was actually just only a couple of weekends ago, it was very big. You know, as I say, I've got people who've been down, had a look and reported back to me. But when it then comes, you know, sort of, when I've been out seeing businesses, that's really been my gauge, that people that I've spoken to, they're just, well, yes, they know the weather changes, but they're not really worried about it. It's their businesses. And you've got one man I spoke to, he had just opened a butcher shop only a month before the first lockdown. And he said, I've put 100,000 of he's a farmer, put 100,000 of my own savings into this. He said, I just have to keep this business open. And we had, you know, a long discussion, of course. So he can see that someone like Zoe Daniels, you know, Climate 200, that's the last thing he's worried about. He's worried about continuing on with his business to be able to then have a life in time. And he'd only be in his early 50s.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to questions. The first three up are Angela, Anne and Terry. So Angela, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, nice to have a chance to speak, and I'm here from the Wentworth, and my concern is I heard something very disturbing last night about APRA, because I'm a medical health professional, and I heard that on the 10th of April, that I'm not sure which bureaucrats or Scott Morrison or whatever, that APRA is now under the WHO, no longer under our constitution. So I'm not sure if Craig Kelly's heard anything about this, because I'm concerned about my job and what's going to happen, what this means if it's true that the WHO and Bill Gates and all that are going to be controlling APRA.
Okay, firstly, APRA's conduct during the last 2 years, where they have gone after medical doctors, has been an absolute disgrace and an outrage. They are acting like a star chamber, silencing doctors from speaking out. And the doctors should be able to, if a doctor thinks some treatment has some issue with, doctors should be free to speak. Doctors are not allowed to be doctors in this country because this APRA. What they did to Dr. Mark Hobart is an absolute disgrace there in Victoria, where they came out, they had his actually medical practice raided, his records, his medical records, private medical records stolen by Dan Andrews' black shirts. And he is being basically prosecuted with no rights of appeal whatsoever by these people. It is a bureaucracy gone mad, power drunk, that need to be wound in. And a United Australia government, United Australia Party, if we have any say in this next government, we'll be making sure APRA have to pull their heads in, and they can't get away with non-medical people telling medical doctors how to run things. That's for one. Now, what you're talking about is a proposal that has come up that the World Health Organization is asking for governments to cede control in future pandemics, that we take our advice and our instructions from the likes of Tedros, who runs the World Health Organization, an Ethiopian Marxist, right? We should be listening to him and to Bill Gates. Right? There's a proposal that goes forward. It hasn't been legislated. The government is very quiet upon it. I'll tell you, it will be over my dead body that if I am in that parliament, and we at United Australia are in that parliament, that we will allow the control of Australia's medical regulators here to be run by people like Tedros, Bill Gates, and the World Health Organization. So I understand it's not there at the moment, but we're going to do everything we can to fight against that.
I just want to remind people of early advice from the World Health Organization when they parroted the Chinese propaganda. This is 14th of January 2020, World Health Organization social media, that there is no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission of coronavirus. That was the stand of the World Health Organization right at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah, I'll just point out for people who may not know, APRA is the registration body that registers all the health professionals. So they decide whether you are legally entitled to practice your particular specialty in this country. So they have a lot of power, and that's the problem. Okay, Anne, please unmute yourself, and I'll just remind everybody, please, no long statements, just a question.
Hello, Craig. I'm sorry, Natalie and Catherine. I'm going to ask Craig a question. I'm from the Socialist Republic of Victoria. I used to follow you all the time on Facebook, you know, especially with the stuff that you did about the lockdowns. Now, you're a very authentic person, Craig, very. How much do you think this is going to be going to impact on any result you have in the federal election?
Oh, firstly, you're talking about I've been banned from Facebook for life. Okay, I built up what was one of the most successful political pages in this country. I was getting more views than the Prime Minister and Mr. Albanese combined. I was getting up to 1 million interactions. That's not just likes. That was people putting shares or comments on my page, over 1 million a month from around the world. And I was challenging the narrative that Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg, didn't seem to like. So I was banned for life, no warnings, no reason to say what you've done wrong. They couldn't identify, they said, oh, just general misinformation without saying exactly what I said was wrong. It was just a general smear. Now, so the situation we've got going this election campaign, I am at a competitive disadvantage against candidates that I am up against because I am banned from Facebook and yet they're allowed to have Facebook pages. I am vilified and have lies told about me and have all sorts of obscenities written about me. Every single day get posted to Facebook and I'm banned from it. Now, just think what we've got here. So we've got a foreign company, a foreign tech giant, with employees based overseas deciding what the Australian public can hear. So this is a great concern at this election campaign. That it's the AEC, Australian Election Commission, I believe, are doing a fair job. But where the concern I have about the fairness of this election is you've got these foreign tech giants censoring what can be said. Now, we've got a policy to deal with this, and it's a simple policy. These people are not publishers, they are platforms. And if you are a social media platform, anything that is put on your platform that can be lawfully said in the public square. So if I can go out on my soapbox on Saturday and stand up on the public square and say certain political statements, again, you can't threaten violence against someone, you can't act defamatory, or you can't breach someone's copyright. But if I am actually speaking within the law, it should be unlawful for these large foreign-owned tech giants to censor political speech. That should be the law in this country. And these companies should face heavy fines for their censorship. As we've known, this history has shown us what happens when you censor freedom of speech. If bad ideas, yes, people put out bad ideas. The way to do it is not to censor them, but to fight and tackle them with the truth and with more speech.
Yeah, thank you. Terry, your turn. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you. Here in Bradfield, we have the wonderful Paul Fletcher and a number of candidates, most of whom are pushing climate change. I don't know what any of them will do if they get to Parliament to change the
You'll
climate.
get better weather. You'll get better weather if you vote for them.
All I wanna-
storms, no more droughts.
All I want to hear, Craig, is that your party will have nothing to do with the climate change scam.
Look, I've probably been labelled the Parliament's biggest climate skeptic. But the reality is, as Dorothy McKellar knew over a century ago, we live in a land of drought and flooding rains. And we're always going to have droughts in this country, always going to have floods. There's always going to be a cost to our society. But if you look at the data, you look at the global data, today's generation is actually the safest measured by the terms of deaths. Bjorn Longberg's done some great work on these numbers. It's something like over the century, we've seen a 98 to 99% decline in deaths from extreme climate events. Now, the idea that you are somehow going to get better weather or less storms or less droughts because these people have their way and import more solar panels from China and put wind turbines everywhere is the greatest nonsense of all time. It really is. And also these people will do. Now, these people are zealots. You generally find they are the more well-off an electorate is, the more dominance that they have, because these people like to feel virtuous about themselves and not caring about their other fellow citizens. It's all about themselves feeling good. If they have to pay an extra couple of $100 for electricity, they don't care. Because they've got the money to afford it. But also are going to do ultimately is close down Australian industry, put our nation at a competitive disadvantage, economically, politically, and military against the Communist Chinese Party, who are having nothing to do with this and are sitting up there today laughing at us. They are laughing at these climate 200 candidates and saying these people are going to benefit us in Communist China because they will wreck the Australian economy and just hand economic advantages to the Communist Chinese.
Okay, thanks. We'll take a written question from Robert, and then we'll go to Philip, Eugene, and Ruven.
Yeah, so I'll just combine a couple of questions that have been sent to me. Do you have any policies or are you able to comment on a couple of issues of concern to the Jewish community? And that's Australian aid money going overseas to, for example, UNRWA, funding radical Arab causes. And the other thing is funding for the ABC, which is facing a lot of allegations of bias against the Jewish community. Make a couple of comments on it.
Look, firstly, the ABC are out of control and an absolute disgrace. I think Tony Abbott said there'd be no cuts to SBS, ABC, and that at the last election. I'll tell you, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to guarantee any funding to the ABC. They are in abuse of their charter at the moment. The idea that they should give political balance to issues. They're clearly just violating the charter and putting the thumbs up. And remember, the Liberal government gave the ABC before this election extra cash, thinking that they would be nice to them. That was like they put all this extra funding into the ABC. So clearly something has to be done about the ABC. You just cannot stand back and allow them to push these continued leftist, especially anti-Jewish and anti-Israeli messages out unabated into the community. Secondly, when you talk about investments overseas, look, there's some great concerns about where some of those money is going to funding terrorist organisations overseas. We've got to watch that very carefully. We've also got to make sure I'll talk about general terms. I'm a little bit off subject on your question, but one of the other policies that we have is with the superannuation savings of Australians. We believe if money is being invested overseas in superannuation funds for the benefit of other countries, whether it's in whatever country, whether it's in Bolivia or Botswana or Kazakhstan, that shouldn't get tax advantages. Now, we give our superannuation savings very significant tax advantages. Now, I believe if we're going to give those tax advantages, that money should be invested here in Australia to support Australian industries and Australian jobs. So one of our specific policies that we have we'll change the superannuation laws that will actually end up seeing requirement that a certain percentage of superannuation money is invested here in this country for the benefit of this country, and that will see over $1 trillion worth of capital currently in European and American stock markets return to Australia to start new industries, new businesses, and to pay for Australian infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. Now, Philip, your turn. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, I've also got a climate question. So I understand that there's a dissatisfaction with the two major parties that will drive voters to look at alternatives like your party or like independents or those pseudo-independents. My fear is that as good as your party might be, that with all the scaremongering or the discussion, let's put it that way, around climate alarmism and climate change, people will be drawn to vote more for the climate activists like Allegra Spendra. I would appreciate your comments on that.
Look, you're right. There's been a lot of brainwashing. We've had an entire generation of school kids go through where they've been completely brainwashed on this subject. I've met a lot of these kids from time to time, and I spoke with them, and it's actually quite sad. You can see the lights are on, but there's no one home. They've been completely hypnotized. They've been terrified at first that the climate is going to kill them when they don't realise they live in they are safer from the climate today than any generation previously in the history of mankind, and yet they are running around thinking they're all going to be wiped out by climate change. Look, you're right. It's not easy to unbrainwash people. It's not easy to explain how the electricity grid actually works, to understand the engineering behind it, of why intermittent generation. You hear Mr. Albanese run around even on television say, renewable generation is much lower cost. But hang on, if you're comparing intermittent generation with consistent, constant supply that you get from a coal-fired power station or even a nuclear power station, you're not comparing apples with apples. So you can't make those cost comparisons. Look, it is an issue. And this is why I've been very disappointed in the Liberal Party, because they've just gone along with this. Now, they should have stand up and they should call it out. They should stand up, and rather than sort of like trying to appease a lot of these people, and all you do is embolden them to make them stronger. There's been too much appeasement on the Liberal side of politics, and it's also the National Party as well, but appeasing all these activists rather than calling them out for the nonsense, the complete, utter anti-scientific nonsense that they've been going on with.
Absolutely. Eugene, your turn. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you. So my question and comment to Natalie. Natalie, I'm just like you are. I'm an immigrant from former Soviet Union. And as you're aware, our community overwhelmingly voting on the right side of the politics. We try and stay away that anything remotely smells like socialism. When we get together with friends, we try and work out why is that in Victoria, where I live, Victoria became a socialist and left center of Australia. This is the only state where Greens won the seat, and they're extremely strong here. Labor always wins actually wins majority in federal and state. We have our idea why, but I'd like to see if you have your opinion why it is so easy here for left to win, as well as probably generally speaking in Australia, why it's center left or left side of politics, unlike us who came from former Soviet Union.
And you're right. I think we have a very heightened perception of socialism, totalitarianism, whether you grew up there or you had parents who actually told you stories about what went on. Australians have a very much shall be right attitude. So they look at things, they look at the television, they look at mainstream media, and it is a lot easier for the mainstream media and government to tell them whatever it is they want them to listen to. And unfortunately, whether you like Daniel Andrews or not, and I'm not a big fan of Daniel Andrews at all by any stretch of the imagination. The one thing he's really good at is fear mongering. He has scared the Australian population, the Victorian population in particular, into doing whatever it is that he says, because there's nothing like fear to control. There's nothing like division to control. And we know, like from former history of communism and socialism, if you divide a nation and you scare a nation, that's what happens. You control the nation. And that's my opinion. I could be completely wrong and off centre, but that's what I think.
Thanks. Look, I might just ask Catherine about this too. Catherine, we're all sort of looking at Zoe Daniel, but the Greens are actually quite a significant force in Victoria. Are you getting, what sort of feeling do you get in terms of the Greens when you go about on the hustings?
The Greens aren't even discussed at all. I'm actually quite amazed. I've seen only twice now. I've seen anyone within the Greens out on the hustings, but when I'm speaking to people, as I say, I'm very much business oriented. We've got so many businesses here. So in speaking to these people, nobody talks about the Greens at all. I'm quite surprised.
Okay, well, that's good. We'll just take another written question from Robert and then we'll go to Reuven.
So just a question for Craig. If you end up controlling the balance of power in the Senate, what will your first moves be?
We'll have a list of our policies that we expect to be acted on. The very first will be to end the mandates. Now, if these mandates are not outlawed, as has been done in Florida under Governor Ron DeSantis, we simply will say we'll be voting no to anything. We will not pass a single piece of legislation. We will not vote yes to anything. We'll just vote no to every single thing until those mandates are lifted and until those basic freedoms, those basic fundamental freedoms of the sanctity of the doctor-patient relationship, the freedom of speech, getting all these government bureaucrats off doctors so doctors can be doctors again and get them off their back. Unless those things are changed, the party will be voting no to every single piece of legislation that comes up before it.
Okay, and Reuven, we'll take you as the last question and keep it brief, please.
Good question, Craig. I'm very concerned, heaven forbid, that Labor gets in and they're going to start pushing for this two-state solution with the Palestinian Authority, who are proxies of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. What are your feelings?
Oh, you should be very. You look at some of the anti-Semitic and anti-Israeli comments that the Labor Party has had. Everyone with friends in Israel should be very concerned about if these people get in. Imagine Christina Keneally or someone, or Penny Wong as the foreign ministers of this country dictating the foreign. That's what we're up against. The idea that they're just at the moment wrapping themselves up into a very small ball and being a very small target. And remember, I think it was back before the 2013 or 2010 election, or maybe 2007, I think, when Kevin Rudd won. And Peter Garrett said at the time, we're not going to say anything. We'll let you know after we win the election campaign. We'll tell you what our policies are. We'll bring it all up then. But I think Australians should be really concerned about what an Albanese government would look like. Mr. Albanese himself, in his past history, shows he has been an extreme left-winger. And remember, it may not only be an Albanese government, they could probably be in government with the Greens and these Climate 200 people who are even more extreme than what the Labor Party are and would push them for these extremist policies. So, look, I think that all over Australia, should be very concerned about what's going on at this election campaign. This is one of the most important election campaigns in our nation's history. And I would encourage everyone watching tonight to support one of the smaller freedom parties. I hope you support ourselves as United Australia Party. If not, we hope you could consider preferencing us, because we will hold these major parties to account. We will do everything in our power to make sure those basic fundamental human rights and freedoms are restored for all Australians.
Yep, thank you. That's a very good note to conclude. So Craig, Natalie and Catherine, thank you for offering the country a true Conservative party. I'll also mention that we also have a candidate in Macnamara, in Jane Hickey, and I'll put her picture up in a moment. So good luck to all of you in getting your messages out there for the election. So just tell everybody where they can go for more information, website, Facebook page, what's the best way to do it?
Well, firstly, there was the Craig Kelly Facebook page, which has now been obliterated and censored by Facebook. It no longer exists. Look, the best place to go, I have a Telegram. I'm on Telegram, a Telegram page, just Craig Kelly MP on Telegram. That's one of the few free speech channels left. Even Twitter is censored. We have our United Australia Party, just a web page. That's probably the best place to go. It's got party policies up there. It's got directions to our some of our other social media platforms and everything that we're doing, and all the candidates, locations of all the candidates. And that's it. So United Australia Party, just Google it, to go straight to their website, and that's where the best place to start would be.
Unlike Craig, I do have social media. I haven't been banned yet. So I do have Instagram, and it's Natalie_Duma. I also have a website, which is, if you Google Natalie Duma, it does come up, and a Facebook page. Although I really detest Facebook, A, because Craig got kicked off it, and B, people use it as a pickup place. So really dislike it immensely. So if anyone wants to contact me, Instagram's probably a better choice for me.
Okay, Catherine, how do people get hold of you for those in Goldstein?
So through Facebook predominantly. Unlike Natalie, I don't have a website. So
okay, so they just Google Catherine Reynolds. There must be quite a few around the world.
Well, it comes under Dr. Catherine Reynolds, and then you'll see the and of course the extension. Of
okay. All right. Thank you again, everybody. All the very best, and Craig, thank you for doing what you're doing. It's wonderful to have you on board, and we wish you all the very best. So thanks to you.
Thanks a lot. And thanks for the opportunity to clear up some of the disgraceful reporting in the Australian misrepresenting me.
Yeah. Okay, that's all we have for tonight. Just before we go, as usual, the L'Chaim program with Morris Klein is on 3ZZZ right now. That's FM 92.3. The United Australia Party with Craig Kelly and the other candidates have been fantastic for tonight. Don't forget, you can keep up to date with what AJA is talking about on our Facebook page. So please like it and share it widely. But for now, we wish you all a very good evening and look forward to seeing you next week as usual on Yom HaShoah. Bye, everybody. Good night to you all.
Thanks for having us.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Right. Thank you. Well done.